People love movies. There are all kinds of movies that are popular: comedies, horror, science fiction, action, drama, romance, mystery, etc. But not all people like all movies. There is some overlap between people, but people are unique in their preferences. Even more interesting is that between people who like a certain genre, they don't even agree on what movies in that genre they all like. If you were to poll 100 people leaving a movie theater, you might get 100 different responses on their viewing experience. It's amazing that people can all watch the exact same thing but come away with different perspectives. How is that possible? If people see the same thing, shouldn't they all report the same observations? Each of us has different subjective experiences of things in life. Most people are white-knuckled during a horror movie, but there's another person who is chuckling at the absurdity. Some people are twisted like that. This issue of subjectivity affects the secular perspective on religion. The Bureau pulls back the curtain on objectivity. It is true that atheists tend to be educated more than religious people are. Demographic statistics bear that out. Atheists use this as grounds to justify that their observations are the correct ones, because those observations are being stated by the smartest people. Oftentimes, atheists paint Christians as dumb rubes and ignorant blue-collar people. These simple folk would surely deconvert from Christianity if they just cracked open a science textbook. Apparently, the only thing standing between a Christian and atheism is a library card and a disdain for potluck dinners. It is said that Christians have been told lies by the church about water parting, axe heads floating, donkeys talking, and bones rising up from the ground. Miracles. If these churchgoers had degrees from liberal arts universities, belief in those supernatural myths would disappear like a lifting fog, according to critics of Christianity. One of the hallmarks of atheist thinking is that they are standing on the solid foundation of science. In their view, science is factual and evidence-based. Anything that defies a lab report, like water turning into wine or a person being resurrected after 3 days, should be ridiculed. A person should only believe what is factual, and anything outside of that is just unfounded personal opinion, according to secular people. However, science is not unassailable. Science is a fantastic tool used by people to understand the world around us. It has led to amazing observations and inventions, like the automatic pencil sharpener, indoor air cooling, and the ability to order a pizza from a smart watch. This is because science is based on a reliable and sound method of being carried out, the scientific method. The scientific method is a stepwise process that people, scientists, use to prevent faulty conclusions. What is supposed to happen is that the scientist eliminates, as much as is possible, human subjectivity from the observation and testing process. The remainder is purely factual. This is the reason why secular people feel so confident in their views. Science is supposedly bolstering them on all sides. While the scientific method is sound and has produced reliable results, skeptics don't often mention that the scientific method is carried out and practiced by people. People are imperfect. People are subjective. No matter how much they try to be impartial and unbiased, they can't help but interject their presumptions into the scientific method. It is a fact that scientific conclusions are never without some sort of subjectivity baked into the result. People will never produce a perfectly objective result. Science is not purely the pursuit of natural facts. Science is like moviegoers who all exit the movie with different perspectives because the scientific method is based on observation. In order to draw scientific conclusions, the scientist must first make observations. No person can make perfectly impartial observations, which means the subsequent experiments have already been limited by subjectivity. In other words, the well has already been poisoned. Karl Popper, a scientist, said that all observation is theory-laden, so the buttresses that skeptics are propped up by don't really exist, certainly not in the full form that is sometimes advertised. Therefore, a person who claims that science is the only arbiter of truth or of facts, or is the only legitimate standard of drawing conclusions, is operating from a false presumption of the reliability of science. It is sometimes acknowledged by skeptics that science is imperfect, but it is always improving. It shouldn't go unnoticed that whenever science improves, it was wrong about what it asserted previously. Secularists will say that our knowledge of the world continues to progress because science progresses. This is not always true. There have been instances where long-held scientific assumptions were overturned or at least questioned anew, which circles back to the initial operating assumption of the scientific method, observation. As observational capability increases, new theories and experiments lead to new ideas. This illustrates a primary flaw in the secular position. Science is not static, it is dynamic. Science is not monolithic, it is always in flux. The scientific stance on various matters is not always established, rather, it is always shifting. It's less like a solid mountain and more like a teenager's fashion sense. There are two sides of the coin. On one side is the self-correcting mechanism of science, on the other side is the permanent fickleness. This may come as a surprise to some people, but scientists are not above reproach. They sometimes cook the books in order to achieve a desired political goal. To summarize, secularists will sometimes beat Christians with the broom of scientific certitude while simultaneously acknowledging that science itself is less than perfect. This seems like an inconsistency. The inconsistency often goes unnoticed because of the belief that science is progressing, but the observational dynamic of the scientific method might not be accounted for in atheist thinking in terms of their imagined superiority. One description of why observation is so subjective was explained by philosopher Immanuel Kant. Based on our cognition and the way reality is constructed, Kant said that we are incapable of knowing in our minds things about objects in the physical world before we have experienced them. For example, if someone sees a chair, all that person really knows is that they are being appeared to chairly. The person does not actually know the empirical object itself. All that is known is the experience of encountering a chair because there is nothing necessary about a chair in the mind that existed before encountering the chair. It's almost like the description of the world in the movie The Matrix. We can know the appearance of things in regards to how they are presented to us, but we can't download the source code of the object itself directly into our minds, nor can we extend our minds into the object itself to know it directly. In contrast, we do know some things in our minds even without any physical, empirical experience of those things, such as a chair that is blue cannot also be red at the same time in the same way. That kind of knowledge, for example, is knowledge of opposites and illustrates our inherent knowledge of logic and rationality, which is called a priori knowledge. Those kinds of propositions are in our minds before we experience anything in the physical world. It's how our minds are able to function and make sense of the world and how we are able to communicate. But the a priori knowledge of opposites does not help us in knowing a chair, in and of itself, as an empirical object. Again, we just know the appearance of the chair because our minds can only process the experience of the chair, 3 dimensions, shape, color, weight, smell, rigidity, etc. Kant called the knowledge of an empirical object das Ding in sich, the thing in itself. This is the reason why all our observations are subjective, even those of scientists. Our minds can only know the experience of the things we are observing and testing, not the actual things in themselves. Those empirical objects, like chairs, are external to our cognitive apparatuses. We can't download a chair into our minds in order to know the object itself directly or perfectly by thought alone. Similarly, we can't extend our minds into the object itself so that our senses are not in the way of direct, unadulterated knowledge. We can only know what our senses deliver to us along with the prior knowledge of logic and rationality that helps us make sense of our experience of the chair. This means scientists will always be limited by our own noetic equipment, that is, our minds and the way we comprehend things. Consequently, there can be no truly objective observations, which means any person who is leaning on science as the basis of their beliefs and knowledge to the exclusion of any other kind of evidence is unnecessarily tying one hand behind their back and saying they can fight Chuck Norris. It is not reasonable to say that I will only believe what science tells me. Consequently, secularism ends up being every bit as subjective as any beliefs that Christians hold, ironically because of the inherent cognitive limitations of the person who is making the claim that they will only believe what science describes or discovers. If our minds can only subjectively perceive the world, then it makes no sense to say we should only believe what our minds have subjectively perceived in the world. If our knowledge of the world is filtered through subjective perceptions, why should we trust those same minds when they claim it is objectively true that we should only believe those subjective perceptions? The contradiction should be obvious. The secular person, the atheist, isn't just walking into quicksand. They are diving into the mud, saying the quicksand will hold them up. It's not a rational position and certainly not a starting point for questioning Christian claims. This critique of science is not about the simple predictive results that can be repeated because those observations are not what's in question. Sure, water freezes at 32 degrees Fahrenheit each time, but those trivial and mundane regularities do not tell us the meaning behind them. No matter how many scientists capture the temperature of freezing water, that will never equal das Ding an sich. The Bureau is not denigrating secularism, nor science, nor our rationality. Rather, secularism and atheism, in and of themselves, constitute an incomplete worldview. That worldview cannot stand on its own. Sometimes people of that persuasion say that they accept an incomplete worldview because they don't feel they have enough information to decide one way or another about the supernatural claims of Christianity. While that seems reasonable on the surface, it's unnecessary for multiple reasons, namely because people have the evidence that they need to have in order to know the truth of Christian claims. On matters that are beyond the purview of science, such as philosophy or metaphysics, we should use appropriate reasoning to seek truth instead of pretending they don't exist because science can't capture them in a test tube. The Bureau sees that secularism is a house of cards.